Hey everyone, it's Dr. Tracy. Today, I want to talk about a term that has been everywhere lately, weaponized incompetence. And before we go any further, I want to slow this conversation down and define what we're actually talking about because how we frame this matters. Weaponized incompetence is a relational pattern in which one partner repeatedly performs tasks poorly, forgets, avoids, or claims incapacity in ways that shift responsibility to the other person. And often, this happens without overt malice, but with very real relational impact. The weapon part isn't always intention. The weapon is the outcome. One person ends up carrying the mental load. The other is quietly relieved of it. And over time, resentment builds slowly and quietly. And I want to name something important right here as we start, because this is where the conversation usually gets flattened, meaning we lose nuance. Weaponized incompetence is not simply a character flaw. It is not automatically a lack of care. And it's rarely about someone being lazy or manipulative in the way the internet often suggests. Much more often, I find this conversation sits in the intersection of a few things. One, learned helplessness or gendered socialization. I was never expected to notice or manage this. Two, avoidance of conflict or shame. This internal thought of, if I do it wrong, I won't be asked again and we won't get into a fight again. Three, fear of failure or criticism. Four, many unspoken agreements that form over time in a relationship. It's just easier if you do it. And in therapy terms, this is the piece I want us to hold on to throughout this conversation. Weaponized incompetence is rarely a solo behavior. It is almost always a co-created dynamic. Oof, let that one land for a minute. This doesn't mean responsibility disappears. It doesn't mean accountability is not part of this conversation. We need ownership and accountability, not blame and not shame. We need two people to show up to the table to have this conversation. And this is what I'm hoping today's episode will allow you to do. Because when we jump too quickly to labels, we risk doing two things at once. We validate one person's exhaustion, but we also quietly strip the other person of their agency. And when agency disappears in a relationship, change becomes almost impossible. So today I want to talk about one, why this term resonates so deeply, especially with women, where the term actually starts to break down, how mental load actually works beneath the surface, and what I see clinically that helps couples move out of these patterns without blame, without minimizing harm, without not looking at impact, and without closing the door on repair. Okay, let's start here. We as humans love binary thinking. Good guy, bad guy, victim, villain, capable, incompetent. Binary thinking is fast and easy, and it's emotionally satisfying. So when you're overwhelmed, your nervous system wants answers fast. So when we hear a phrase that says, this isn't all in your head, you're carrying more, it feels like life. Oxygen, especially when we're talking about the mental load, because the mental load isn't just about doing tasks. It's about holding them. It's about knowing when your kids need new shoes and what size they are. It's about tracking the upcoming birthday party and the friend's preferred gift. It's remembering the dishwasher pods when you're actually out of them. It's anticipating the needs of everybody in the family. And research consistently shows that women are carrying the majority of this invisible labor, even with both partners are working full time. So when the word like weaponized incompetence shows up, it makes sense for us to latch onto it because it says to us, look, this is real. I'm not crazy. It matters. And still, we need to be careful because here's where I start to see trouble when a label starts to do harm. I hear weaponized incompetence as intentional harm. I want to stop there. I hear this word as one person is creating intentional harm to the other person. And that downward spiral, if I'm the one where my partner is doing this weaponized incompetence thing, that puts me in the victim role, but it also takes away my partner's sense of agency. So this word suggests that your partner is consciously thinking, if I mess this up enough times, they'll stop asking. And while that can happen in some relationships, in my clinical experience, this is not what's happening most of the time. So much more often, I see something else. It looks more like this loss of agency piece. I see people who, over time, have stopped trusting their own ability to do things well. I think of this one couple that I worked with. She came in furious, and honestly, I couldn't blame her because everything she asked him to do, she had to follow him multiple steps over, finding the keys or finishing a task, closing the task, which I'll talk about in the podcast next week. He would ask how to do something. She would spend more time explaining it to him. From her perspective, it looked like incompetence, but what happens inside when she asks you to do something? He then said, I already feel like I'm going to fail before I start. Let that land for a minute. Imagine living in that place. I already feel like I'm failing. Or what's the point? I'm inadequate in this relationship. That's not weaponization. That's learned helplessness. And I know so many of you are going to land in this and say, oh, but that really rubs me the wrong way because I don't get to be in that position. And I know, but I want us to find the nuance in this conversation because somewhere along the line for this person, for your partner, they learned that autonomy wasn't safe. They were never allowed to step out to make their own decisions. And so many of the men that I've worked with feel helpless in their partnerships. They never learned to individuate, to be able to express their needs and desires. And that just snowballs into what's happening for you in this relationship. Now, it's not yours to own, but we do know that when people lose agency, they don't become empowered. They become avoidant, defensive, or passive. I don't think that's weaponized. Okay, let's talk now about how this actually develops inside a relationship. Most couples don't start here. They start with good intentions. One partner naturally takes the lead, often because they notice more. They care more about details, or they're more anxious, or they're type A. I'm type A. I can relate to that. I really appreciate control. And at first, sometimes it sounds like, oh, you're better at this, or well, you care more about this, or just tell me what you want and I'll do it. But what ends up happening is she often becomes the manager. He often becomes the assistant. I also know this experience because I had so much pride going to the store and buying my then boyfriend his deodorant to store in my apartment. But guess what? Guess who became the keeper of all of the things needed in our bathroom? It was me. And it wasn't my husband's fault for not understanding what my deodorant was. It was that I overfunctioned and I took on more and I continued to own more and allow him to take up less space in our relationship. This is a great place for me to plug my first book. I didn't sign up for this. I know so many couples have come to this place of feeling resentful, of feeling like they didn't sign up for the relationship that they're currently in, of having to manage the mental load. Inside my book, this is my first book, I walk you through how to actually shift out of codependency or hyper independence and into healthy interdependence so you can have the relationship that you want. I'll put the link for the book in the show notes. So here's the quiet cost of this overfunctioner, underfunctioner dynamic. The manager becomes exhausted and resentful, and the assistant becomes disengaged and unsure. They also grow resentful over time because they lose agency. And both partners experience this in very different ways because when agency is gone, they start to feel this quiet emotion, which is resentment. Let me say that one more time to let it land. When we lose agency, when we don't get our need met, we start to feel resentful. This is where I see so many couples slide into blame, victimhood, scapegoating, and not because the other person is bad, but because the system that they're in isn't working for them. If you happen to be feeling this resentment in your relationship, know that you are not alone. And also, I know it's a doomsday feeling, but it actually is not the end of a relationship. Resentment is a really powerful emotion that holds a lot of information for us, and it tells you that you have unmet needs in your partnership, and that can give us a lot of space to work with. So let's talk about why just doing the task isn't enough, because a lot of partners end up remaining in the assistant role instead of being a co-partner or a teammate. Many men are happy and willing, and they say things like, just tell me what to do and I'll do it. And a therapist confession, in 2006, when I started working with couples, I too would ask the other person, just give them a list. Ugh, I cringe at that. But we didn't know back then. We didn't know what we know today about the invisible labor and the mental load. So if your therapist is saying this to you today, they haven't yet learned the fair play method. And it has been such a game changer in terms of me, myself as a human, but also in terms of me as a therapist and the work I do with people. Let's understand the mental load together. So tasks are not just one thing. They actually have three parts. Eve Rodsky outlines this in her book, Fair Play. First is concept. This is noticing that something needs to be done. It's all of the pieces that go into a task. Then second, plan. Deciding how and when you're going to do it. Planning. That's a lot of work. The third piece, execution. This is you actually doing the thing. Now, most resentment doesn't live in execution. That's the easy part. And it's often the part I see most men doing. They're at drop off, they're making lunch, but they didn't buy the ingredients or know that they're out of the kiddo's favorite dipping sauce. This all lives in concept and planning. And that work is real. So what tends to happen for women is they offload the execution, but they don't talk about the conceptualization and the planning. Here's one more example. Let's use the example of getting groceries. Now, that is actually not the task. The task is knowing what meals are coming up. checking what's already in the fridge, remembering each person's dietary needs, anticipating who will be home on which night. So when your partner says, just tell me what you need me to do, what the other partner hears is, just carry the whole mental process and I'll show up at the end. And honestly, that's exhausting. That's not teamwork. That is the parent-child dynamic and the overfunctioner and underfunctioner dynamic. And it's why so many women feel like they're doing more, because they're thinking more. They're spending so much more in this planning phase. So let me loop this back to weaponized incompetence, because sometimes I believe that people don't have a full understanding of what is entailed in tasks, and we need to have this conversation so that you and your partner are on the same page. Let me shift now into the system that couples live in. This is co-created between two people, and it's where people get stuck. Here's the cycle I see over and over again. One partner overfunctions. They remind, they fix, they redo, they micromanage, not because they want control, but because things fall apart otherwise. And the other person underfunctions. They wait, they avoid, they disengage, they stop trying because it never feels good enough, and both end up feeling misunderstood. She feels alone, he feels incompetent. And then the label, weaponized incompetence, enters the room. And suddenly, curiosity shuts down, because once someone feels labeled as the villain, connection is no longer possible. So what actually helps a couple tackle the mental load? Because blaming and shaming and overusing the word weaponized incompetence isn't it. I encourage you to be a conscious consumer of the words that you regularly lean on. You can understand something, and not everything is weaponized incompetence. So first, let's slow down the blame. We're not eliminating accountability. We're not minimizing harm, but understand that the system you're both in, it's there and it's relevant, and you get to see the system for what it is, as having two people that have co-created it. I think there's so much power in both partners taking responsibility for how they got here. And I know when it comes to the mental load, a lot of times we point the fingers outward and we want our partner to join in and take the lead and take over, but it requires both of us in this dynamic to change and shift. Second, explicit conversations about shared ownership, not just tasks. What does this mean? It means talking about who notices things, who plans things, who's following through. It means you agreeing on what done actually looks like. And it means building in regular check-ins, regular weekly meetings, not surveillance. We're not doing this manager and assistant role, but instead so you both come to the table with that sense of agency. The goal is for you to be a team. It's to shift from you versus me to us against the tasks that we're trying to manage in our home, in our relationship. The ultimate goal is for you to feel like you are together in this. Okay, so let's come back to this term, weaponized incompetence. Is it a helpful term? At times, yes. My response is this. Naming an experience can be incredibly powerful. For many people, especially women, it has put language to exhaustion, to resentment, to invisibility, and that matters. Being able to name what you're living inside of can be the first step towards change. But is it harmful? Also, yes. Because when we use this term as a fixed identity for our partner, when we see them only through this lens, we quietly take away their agency. And when we remove someone's agency, we don't move closer to change. We actually move further away from it. We stop seeing the real relationship patterns we are living inside of and co-creating them together. We stop noticing the history, our nervous system responses, our learned roles, the ways both people have adapted over time. And most importantly, we close the exit. Because once your partner is cast as the problem, there's no real pathway left to solve the problem. These labels, they're seductive because they simplify complexity. But relationships are not simple. They're nuanced, they're layered, and they're shaped by history, power, stress, identity, and survival strategies. And if this term helped you to name something, that is valid. If it helped you to stop minimizing and dismissing your experience, that matters. But I want to be very clear about this next part. If we keep labeling our partners in ways that shut down curiosity, flatten context, and erase agency, we risk missing the very thing that could actually help the relationship heal. Real change doesn't come from assigning blame. It comes from understanding the system you're both in and choosing together to do something different. And that requires nuance. It requires discomfort. It requires moving beyond the ease of labels and into the harder work of relational responsibility. All right, so instead of asking, is my partner using weaponized incompetence? I want to offer a different question. Where has agency quietly disappeared in our relationship? And how do we start to build it together? Because when agency returns, resentment has a chance to ease, and it allows for more curiosity in your relationship. Exploration, curiosity, play, connection, all of those things are important. All right, if you're looking for more, I invite you to join me in my 30 Days of Us. This is one of my favorite resources, and it's going to allow you to have better conversations, to feel more connected. I give you one bite-sized exercise to do every single day. This is so that you can feel close and connected, not for you to take on the mental load. In fact, get your partner to sign up. They get the emails. You can both have the emails. You get one exercise a day. You initiate the exercise every day. You set a timer on your phone. You come together if that works for you. But this is a chance for you to open up dialogue, to practice curiosity, to improve connection and communication. And I work from all of those pillars from helping couples for almost nearly 20 years, helping them change how they feel in their relationship and to not keep their relationship on the back burner. All right, if something resonated from today, if this sparks a conversation for you, I invite you to share it with someone. Maybe you've talked about the mental load before. Share it with your partner. Open the dialogue together instead of having this defensive blame, shame cycle. I have to remind you at the end of every episode that this conversation is for educational purposes only and does not substitute the care for a licensed mental health care provider. See you next time.